everybody. Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of chatting with bassist, educator, author, Jonathan Nadel.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Raul. It's a pleasure to be here speaking with you.
My pleasure, man. So we've got a lot to talk about because there's all kinds of great stuff, but we always like to start from the beginning. How did you get started in music and on bass?
Okay, sure. Well, I'm definitely from a classical musical family. My brother is a conductor and orchestra librarian. My grandmother was a concert pianist. So we were one of those families where all the kids were put in classical music lessons from a young age. So I was learning the cello actually before the bass. I remember walking to my cello lessons and hearing the high school jazz band rehearsing down the hall, and I really just fell in love with the sound. And I remember having a pretty big crush on my seventh grade orchestra director, and when she said, "Does anyone want to play bass?" my hand shot up.
Yeah.
And so then I got my first bass guitar for my bar mitzvah, and it was classical and jazz upright bass playing, and me sitting in the basement learning Chili Peppers tunes on my bass guitar. Had a band with my middle school and high school friends called Audio Bakery. We recorded several albums and played around Chicago. And then my story is like a lot of bass players, right? I went to music school, studied jazz bass at Indiana University, and had a good experience there. And after that, worked for a few months on a cruise ship in a jazz quartet. So we were playing in a jazz club 6 nights a week. So that was part of the Seth Burkhart Four. And then I finally settled in Chicago and started my music and freelancing career.
It's interesting because you'd mentioned the kind of classical side of it, but your solo work in your book, the one that always kind of jumps to me is Urraca. And that means in Spanish magpie. I don't know if it had any other meaning to you.
There's a mountain, a mesa in New Mexico that I hiked as a young man called Urraca Mesa. So that was a particularly tough hiking day for me, and that's why I titled the album that.
Got you.
But that's great.
And it is an arrangement for 2 or 4 basses. Is it more on the classical side or on the jazz side?
You know, it's a jazz album that features the bass, and I improvise on every track, but I definitely was not trying to pigeonhole myself in the jazz idiom. I told myself that I didn't want to be afraid of pop music. Also, I knew it was a bass-led album. It wasn't going to sound like pop music regardless.
Sure.
But I wasn't going for the avant-garde, at least not in terms of jazz. I just wanted to make something that even a non-jazz listener would enjoy, would sound nice, and make people say, wow, I can't believe that sounds so nice, and it's a bass guitar playing that music.
You're also very active with your band Marvin. It's kind of an interesting fusion of genres in that it is a rock-jazz kind of cross-blend.
You know, we're all jazz musicians to the core. Jazz is our favorite music, but like I said, I grew up on Chili Peppers, and some of these guys, you know, when they were teenagers, grew up on Rage Against the Machine. So, you know, we can't ignore that we love that music. So there's definitely, you know, we improvise our parts every night. We think it's jazz. Some people wouldn't call it jazz, but jazz means a lot of different things. So
it is a pretty wide open, and sometimes I think we just try to put things in a cubby so that we can go, okay, yeah, this is this or this is that. But there's a lot of genres that have a lot more flexibility, like prog rock, that you go, okay, this could be one extreme or it could be the other extreme. And the same is true with jazz.
Yeah, it could be very heavy or it could be very light. It could be very straightforward or very esoteric. But as long as there's rhythm and there's improvisation, I think we're describing the same thing.
Sure. Well, and I got schooled a little by Reggie Workman, who, of course, when you look at it, he played with Monk and Coltrane and all this. And he even went as far as to make the distinction of kind of the site of origin. So like New Orleans jazz would be the one thing, New York jazz, the more African-American jazz scene versus the non-African-American jazz. So again, you can kind of subdivide it and chop it however you like. But
well, and it's all connected, right? Jazz is a family tree of genres. And there is the trunk of the tree, which is Black American improvisatory music.
Yes.
But I think where the term gets lost, and I didn't know we were going to speak about this, but I'm happy to.
Yeah.
if you don't know the core, the trunk of the tree, and your first exposure to jazz is tasting the fruit, it's going to really depend which branch you grab first.
Sure.
So, I love asking musicians what their first jazz albums were, because it's almost like the first 1, 2, 3 tastes you have of it, and then you have to gradually go back and discover what led to this. And once you're steeped enough in the genre, you know that there's a connection to everything. Nothing came out of nowhere. Everything followed some tradition, some path.
Absolutely. Well, and you also, I tend to gravitate, as we talk about branches on the tree, I guess I go to the older branches for my jazz fruit because I like a lot of the older stuff. Some of the newer fusion pieces and things, I'm kind of like, oh, I get what they're trying to do, but this is the emotional response I get isn't the same as I would get to, again, we go to some Miles or some Monk or, some of the real old school kind of stuff.
When I'm walking around the house, when I'm making dinner, I'm listening to Frank Sinatra and Nat King Cole.
Yeah.
And I love the Cole Porter and the Irving Berlin tunes. This is the music that I like to listen to. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't want to play it every day, right? Then I want to play Marvin. I want to play my music every day because it feels good to play it. And I think as a musician, we have to find that balance of what do we like aesthetically and balance it. What's the internal experience that I want to have when I'm performing? And I think that's how we all find an aesthetic that speaks to us.
Speaking of, again, with Marvin and especially the discography, you've been pretty busy over the last few years. Things kind of quiet down for 2020 because it's tied down for everybody. But, you've recorded with Marvin, you've recorded with Audio Bakery, you've got your solo album that just came out last year. Quite the variety of things there.
Yeah, and there's the occasional freelancing guest spot too. Someone sends me a tech email, they need some bass on a track, and I don't list every little thing. But I think it's important to keep writing and keep creating and to keep collaborating. So I was definitely a fully collaborative member of Audio Bakery. Those are my high school friends. Obviously, most of my recording work has been with Marvin, and that's a really interesting process because I'm really a sideman in that band. Danny Markovich and Danny Rabin, they write the songs, and they bring it to us in one rehearsal, and then we take it on the road. And we kind of do things more like a stand-up comedian in where we will road test our set, and after a year of making sure that it works in a real space, then we take it to the studio and we try to capture what that live experience was. Wow. And the songs really evolve and change every night. So they write the initial songs, and a lot of the changes happen in the van after the gig. Hey, what did you think of those solo changes? Why don't we change that third chord to this? So I really do get to write my own parts, improvise on them, and Danny have always been good about letting my voice speak as to the arrangements and the form. We definitely collaborate. It's their music, but I'm happy to collaborate with them. And I definitely needed my own project to put music together on my own and put that out there.
Got you. Well, and I found it interesting. We talked kind of in the collection of records, Israeli jazz. Now, that's kind of a combination that is distinctive. And it certainly, when listening, you pick up because I love world music and some of the differences in the choices of, scales and chords and things that they would pick that are normal elsewhere that we don't see as much here in the U.S.
I think you see it more than you think. It just comes out sounding a certain way when we do it, but it's not a super rare scale choice. And even in traditional jazz, when you have a dominant 7 chord with a flat 9 and a flat 13, jazz musicians are going to use what's referred to as the Jewish scale, which is, the Hava, Nagila, Hava, that flat to the 5th mode of harmonic minor. So certainly when it comes out on a soprano saxophone, it sounds a little bit more like klezmer, but when you hear it on a tenor, everyone's been playing these scales all through the American songbook history.
Very interesting. And as we're talking about sound, how are you getting your sound? What gear are you playing on?
Sure. So I guess I'll start with the amp here. I'm very happy to be endorsed by Epiphany bass amps. So I'm using this Piccolo 999. So it's about 1,000 watts. and I use it for everything. And then I have their Tour Series cabs. So here I've got the 112 and the 410. Both have just a banging tweeter, because I'm not a huge slap guy, but I'll do it. But I use a lot of harmonics to extend the melodic and harmonic range of my bass and provide chords and textures. So these cabs and these tweeters are really good at putting out the high end. And I don't have fresh strings on now, but I'm kind of a big string changer.
Okay.
About once a month, I usually swap my strings out, because I do want that bright sound. I can always palm mute and roll my tone knob to make my sound darker.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I see you've got a fret wrap on your Roscoe, so that also will...
Oh, yeah. That's been a really helpful tool, and I can showcase it here. This is my Roscoe 4-string. It's a PJ combo, so I've got the P pickup, the J pickup. Keith built this really nice custom ramp in between them, and I'm just doing the normal standard, 19 frets, but it's got a P bass body and a jazz bass neck.
Nice.
Which is really helpful because it's nice and skinny at the top. I can make these nice chord patterns. I don't have to shift around as much. It's a lot easier on my left hand. And I love having the fret wrap. I had to double it around so it would fit this skinny 4-string neck. But what I actually like about it is when I slide it up to the 5th fret, not only does it block out all the extra finger noise, but it starts to lower the strings, and it also actually acts as like a harmonic capo. So I can, I've been working on some Bach cello suites that have a repeating A note, and it's this A, but I can play it with this harmonic now on the open string. And when I slide it up, it actually works as a full capo. I'm actually getting the note. And the other thing that it does is it puts an extra pressure on the back of the strings, and it actually lowers my action. So when I'm recording and I want to play a solo and I want to have an even lower action, by bringing the fret wrap up, I can adjust my action that way in the middle of the song. I don't want to have too low of an action that I can't get a thumpy sound, but it's nice to have the option to bring it down and to shred, right?
Gotcha. And I see you've got Aguilar pickups and a ramp.
Yeah, so I can talk about the ramp too, because I know that a lot of us fusion guys are comfortable with the ramps and have thought a lot about it, but I know for younger musicians, they maybe have never seen one. So I can certainly talk about what that is and why it's helpful. So what a ramp does is it prevents me from going through the strings into the body, right? You actually can't dig in too hard. It keeps you playing lightly on top of the strings, which is really helpful for faster playing. It also gives the option of where you want to put your thumb. And usually you see ramp between 2 soap bar pickups. I had to get mine cut a little bit special to fit between the P and the J. Guys like Gary Willis, who kind of pioneered the use of this, will put it here between the fingerboard and the pickups, and that's usually referred to as a tapping ramp. But he's not a big thumb guy. Well, he's a huge thumb guy. He uses his thumb, but he's not a double thumb guy.
Yeah.
So a lot of bassists now are putting the ramp between the pickups, so they still have the ability to dig in both ways with their thumb and have a nice even playing space over their pickups.
Gotcha.
The big thing is that the curvature of the ramp should match the radius of the neck so that it's always the same height above the strings. So this is a pretty standard neck. It's got a 9-inch radius, so this ramp has some curve to it. I've got my Mikey bass over there that has a 0 radius neck.
Wow.
So that has a totally flat ramp. And you see this also on, I think, Hadrian Farud's signature Mayonis bass, which has a 20-inch radius neck, which is pretty flat. So the ramp that comes with those basses is a plexiglass ramp that's also completely flat.
And since you mentioned the Mikey, tell us about your Mikey bass.
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about it. This is a special bass. I'm really happy playing the 4 strings, really trying to see what I can do with the instrument I fell in love with. But this is a really special bass that I used a little bit in Marvin. But this is a fretted, fretless convertible bass. And one guy makes them in his garage in Toronto. Okay. And I think I'm one of very few people that has one, certainly, that has 2 of them. But yeah, it's got this lever right here, and it's a little unbelievable to see, but it's got frets and they all roll over with the flip of the switch. It also has 2 preamps, so I've got the bass middle treble for the fretted setting and the bass middle treble for the fretless setting in these concentric pots. And when I flip the frets over, it reroutes to the other preamp, so I can set up a groovy, thumpy rhythm tone, and then I can even play a bright, mid-heavy, fretless tone for soloing and whatnot. So it's definitely a fun tool. I used it when I'm freelancing, playing some jazz gigs, recording. I don't bring these out too often anymore. Like I said, I'm really enjoying the 4-string playing, but this is a bass I'll never get rid of.
Gotcha. Well, I've heard of them, and it's actually the first one I've seen in action. I think I've seen how they work the mechanics of the fret shift.
They really work, and he uses stainless steel hardware. So these frets are not wearing down, and the fingerboard is plastic. Not worried about it warping. I mean, I've had this bass for years, and it still flips like a dream.
Wow!
Between the settings.
Very cool.
I've got flat wound strings on it now because I don't want to wear into the fingerboard. That's something that, if for anyone out there who's getting into fretless bass playing, definitely flat wound strings give you some of that sound, but also they're going to save your fingerboard from being scratched up. You can already see when I had round wound strings, they started scratching into the fingerboard. So I learned that pretty quickly. This is a fun tool.
Got you. And since you mentioned strings, do you have a preference in strings?
Diodario, light top, medium bottom.
Okay.
The normal ones. I tried some of the NYXLs and I liked them a lot. And it was kind of like paying a little bit extra for a nicer haircut. You look a little bit fresher for a few days, and then it looks the same as a cheaper haircut. So, I change my strings so often, I didn't want to spend top dollar for strings. So,
are there any other particular elements that you use to get your sound? We got the amp, we've got your basses. How about one that gets overlooked?
Don't skip on the cables. You're sending your sound through a wire, and it's got to be good components, or it's going to take some of the edge off your sound. So I like the copper tipped bass cables because I want that extra bright, extra high end to not be lost. And the other thing is I really don't use a lot of pedals. And when I am going to use them for a recording or for a gig, my favorite pedal is my bypass pedal, right? So I have a pedal that will reroute my signal around my pedals because if you listen to your sound, you side by side, your clean sound with and without your pedals, you'd be amazed at how much tone suck is going on. So in Marvin, I really use no pedals. The whole point of that band is for all of us is what can we do with our hands? It's not a sound or noise driven band. And when it is, it's based on physical techniques, not on tools, not on anything flashy. We want to do what everyone can do with the instruments that they have at home, and we want to do it well and inspire people to explore their instruments.
Got you. Now, when you mentioned the cable, is there a particular brand that works best for you?
Not specifically. We had a really good relationship with Lava Cables.
Okay.
When they were open, and the owner of Lava would show up at our shows in Tulsa, and he tossed a few cables our way. Nice. When we stopped by the factory, but I think they were bought out, so I'm still playing my Lava Cable and loving it.
Gotcha. Well, Ian, looking ahead, as we're chatting, we're in the pandemic, and a lot of reality has changed for so many musicians. If I recall correctly, you were busy touring and doing all this stuff before this all kind of got shut down.
We were playing about 150 to 200 cities a year, hard ticket gigs, and with a few festivals thrown in. We were supposed to play Cruise to the Edge with members of Yes and King Crimson. We did it last year. It was a really, really fun time, and we were very excited, and that didn't happen. Yeah, so that all got shut down. I still talk with my bandmates pretty frequently, but we're not trying to perform at the moment. We're not trying to gather people together in a space at the moment.
Sure. So what kind of plans, what things are you working on for the future?
Definitely working on my second album, teaching a lot, practicing a lot, finished a bunch of arranging projects. I took the Marvin anthology and I transposed it to B flat so that any of our fans that play saxophone or trumpet can play our music as well.
Nice.
So yeah, I've finished up a lot of writing projects. That's what I've been doing in quarantine. As for the future, I've been sitting here alone with my bass for months, right? So I'm actually working up a lot of solo material. Some of my solo album was arranged for 2 basses. Now I'm finding ways to play it on at once, right?
Yes.
So I've worked up about an hour of solo material. I've been playing with some patios with my trio, and maybe I'd love to give a recital
There you
one
go.
day. I feel like that's something that doesn't happen in the professional world, and I wish it happened a little bit more often. As musicians would just put themselves on stage and say, "This is what I'm working on. I want you to come see the process." Yeah, waiting for things to open up again.
Yeah, and you'd mentioned that before we were recording that you had been involved with a project that was an no audience performance that you're playing.
Yeah, so I've been wary of jumping into the live stream scene. I know everyone's doing that right now, but me and the Marvin guys agree. When we put something out, we want it to be something of quality, as far as the playing goes, but also the sound quality. Mm-hmm. So the big problem with live streams is they're not mixed well unless you have a sound guy on hand who's sending a signal from the board. But I did get to play in the first band for Chicago Jazz Fest this year. Singer-pianist named Isabella Isherwood. Mm-hmm. And so I was playing upright bass in a really wonderful jazz trio, a great drummer by the name of Chris Parker. So we went to Constellation Jazz Club for playing for no audience. Her parents were there, my partner was there, and they said, "Oh, should we clap after solos?" And I said, "Please don't," because I watched some of the Wynton Marsalis's live streams, and there was like 2 people in the audience, and he finishes playing a killer solo, and then you hear
clap, clap.
And it's really awkward because it just sounds like a terrible gig, and it's not. But so we just kind of decided it would be a pure, in a vacuum performance.
Gotcha.
And it went really well.
Very cool. Well, there's definitely going to be a lot of adapting as we move forward. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty and nobody's exactly sure how they are going to go about this and or if they're going to. Because as I talk to a lot of musicians that are at the older end of the spectrum and at more risk, they're kind of like, yeah, I don't know that I'll ever tour again.
And maybe a silver lining, and this is harsh to say, and it's coming from a younger musician, but if it makes more space for younger artists to make it to bigger stages, that's going to help some people's careers. Because we run into this. There's not on the festivals and on the jazz festivals. There's not always enough room for young artists that are doing innovative things to speak their piece. We're waiting on musicians that are still in the limelight decades later.
Yeah. And
I value those musicians, but I know what it's like to not have those opportunities and to want them. So we're hoping that all I can say is we're gonna do everything we can, and we're gonna try everything we can. I had this idea that maybe what we need is a revitalization of speakeasy culture.
Yeah.
Because if you could start getting instrumental music in small rooms, and we're coming 100 years to full circle, and that would just be an amazing time to live in for an instrumental musician.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Well, and I'm going to take us kind of full circle here because in around 2016, you did a piece for us with Brent Anthony Jackson, and it was titled "Why Music is Important." Oh, yeah. And reflecting
he's a
now.
Lovely guy, by the way.
Oh yeah, he's an amazing dude. But kind of in comparison, and I think this is one of the things we talk about a lot. Looking at it now, has anything changed on why you feel music is important? Seeing that we no longer have all the access to the venues and all this stuff, how has that changed, or is it more important than ever?
I think it's as important as ever, but we really need it now. I was playing a jazz duo gig, and a friend of mine was milling about the audience, and he just kind of, like a tear came to his eye because he realized he hadn't heard live music all year, and it's something that's a regularly part of his life, and just he was realizing how much he missed it. And I don't know if you guys know this. I haven't brought it up yet, but I do have I fundraise for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and that's what I've been doing now in quarantine. I have been speaking with older music lovers specifically for weeks, and it frequently comes up how much they miss live music, and I tell them that there's all these online opportunities, things you can tune in from home that are really valuable, and I'm hearing a lot of the same thing. It's there's no substitute for live music.
Absolutely.
There's no substitute for it.
Absolutely. Well, and if people want to stay on top of what you're doing, where's the best place for them to look?
Certainly my Bandcamp. Every time I release something, I put it up there. So my album is there. I transcribed it for 2 to 4 basses as well. I wanted to give young bass players the ability to sit down next to each other and play music that was arranged for that instrumentation, but also I wanted to give teachers something to work on with their students. If they're working on thumb technique, if they're working on harmonics, feel free to pick through that. I would love to see students playing that with their teachers. But then also check out Marvin. We've got 8 albums released. I've recorded on the most recent 3. We're very active on Facebook, on Bandcamp. You can follow us on Bands in Town to see where we're playing. Yeah, follow us all there, and we're very approachable. There's no social media rep. There's no intern. This band is a DIY band. It is 4 dudes and their phones. Yeah. So if you write to us there, you're going to get us responding directly to you right away.
Very cool. Well, and I'd say for most part, and I have the great benefit of talking with bass players it pretty much exclusively, and I have to say the vast majority are very chill dudes and very approachable. So I reinforce that you never know. I mean, I remember the first time I talked with Chuck Rainey, and he's got a discography that is greater than anyone else's on the planet, and he was such a nice and chill guy.
I'll tell you a funny story. I was in college. Maybe I was a junior. I was in my weekly bass lesson with my teacher, Jeremy Allen, and there's a knock on the door, and I am expecting the next student. My lesson's about to wrap up. And I open the door, and Victor Wooten and Steve Bailey are standing in front of me.
Oh, wow.
Steve must have, he knows Jeremy from this, that, and the other, and between the sound check and the gig, which I had tickets to, they decided to pop in and say hi, and it happened to be during my bass lesson. And I just remember feeling like a drop in the ocean of bass playing that day.
Totally.
And I was super starstruck, but they were absolutely sweet and charming. And Victor says, "What are you working on?" And I don't even remember what I said.
Absolutely. Well, you couldn't ask for 2 nicer guys than Victor and Steve.
Oh, yeah.
Well, anyway, John, we appreciate you taking time to chat with us. Folks, you've seen him here. Jonathan Nadel on Bass Musician Magazine.
Thank you so much.